name is Teresa. I am your millennial music auntie, and we are discovering music, underground music, and talking about all things music and culture here on this channel. And this is my first video on my channel, so thank you so much for being here. I had a slightly viral TikTok, and it was because I was upset at an Anthony Fantano review of Osama-san's new Psychotic album, which I had just looked up new music that was released, and honestly, the cover art looked interesting to me, and so I just listened to it from that, and I was very pleasantly surprised, and I really liked it, and so I posted a little video on TikTok about how I liked it, and I got a really positive response, and I just wasn't expecting any of that, and I later watched an Anthony Fantano review of it. He gave it a 6 to 7 or whatever he does with his light sixes or something like that. A strong 6 to light 7, that's what it was. And it upset me, and it made me, and a lot of people on my TikTok said that, oh, that's actually a good review from him, etc., etc., etc. So it got me thinking about the meta of what is reviewing music. Why should you even review music? What is the whole point of giving it a number or a grade or whatever? And today, that's what we're doing. We're talking about why we even review music, if we should review music, and the history of music criticism. So let's get into it. So I am a longtime viewer of Mr. Fantano. I definitely remember watching him in 2015. And so my experience back then was oh, I feel like an insider. Oh, this is so hipster. I get to discover all of the underground things that nobody knows about and when they first are coming out, etc., etc. And that helped me expose me a lot to, especially to hip hop. It was some of those reviews, and also because I'm a former choir teacher, a lot of my middle school and high school students put me on to a lot of rap and R&B as well. So that all helped it kind of become full circle for me. But over time, I feel with not just Fantano, with all music critics, it's just I go back to Fantano because that used to be the only music critic person that I ever watched, because the rest of my music life was in the classical world. I'm classically trained in clarinet. I taught band. I taught choir, so the regular music world was just what the kids were listening to and what I found on YouTube, and that was the only person that I watched on YouTube. So over time, I feel there became a quantity over quality problem when it should have been quality over quantity, and the numbers, the reviews, the grades that these albums got, it started to upset me, especially recently. When I looked up the Osama-san album, I really genuinely liked it, and then he got a strong 6 to a light 7, and I'm well, why are you, Mr. Fantano, the god of grading music? Why does your opinion matter so much? And I know that there's rappers that have dissed him in their songs and everything too, because it just gets catty. And so I feel just in the music critic space in general, there's also been some articles I've read that I've disagreed with. There's some other YouTubers recently that I've watched that I've disagreed with. And I feel they're just not getting it, and they're not keeping up with the times. And that's hard because it's really hard because now I'm in my 30s and I have to check myself and make sure that I'm not being closed-minded about anything, not just about music. So it's tough. So the new generation of music, people are not getting it. So let's go into part 2 and talk about what the new generation of music is actually doing. The new generation of music is so exciting because they are really experimenting with anything and everything, and they cannot be put into a box. You've got people that are becoming pretty big, like Tu Hollis. He's doing a lot of EDM with rap fusions. We've got people like Che, who goes back and references Crystal Castles in his songs, but that's more of a rage rap type of space. We've got people like Osama-san, who's also kind of in the rage rap space, and then that becomes kind of an EDM rage type of thing. We've got Lucy Bedrock, who's got all of these influences like J-pop and digicore. We've got people like Jane Remover, And you cannot put Jane Remover in a box because every single project that Jane Remover comes out with is in a different genre. And so these artists are confusing the critics, and also the mixing is very interesting because sometimes it's a stylistic choice to not be mixing these things so perfectly. And a lot of these music critical reviews are like, oh, the mix was bad. And when I first listened to Jane Remover's Revenge Seekers, I kind of had that reaction myself because the vocals are just not very like present, and the vocals are not in front, and it's kind of hard to hear what the vocals are doing amongst all of the density of the rest of the production of that album. But if you listen to Jane Remover's other projects, you know that that is intentional and that that was done very much on purpose as a stylistic choice. And so I do think that that is to be appreciated. So a lot of the music now, it's evolving more and more past this perfect sound to be more of a part of someone's persona. This unconventional sound quality is like part of the aesthetic of what these musicians are doing. So, and it's also mixing cultures. People will call this new generation of artists, they'll call them internet native, and that's kind of like thrown around as like an insult. But I think that being internet native, which means like taking a bunch of inspiration from like global inspiration, basically, because you get it all on the internet. It's not necessarily from where you grew up. And I don't think that that is cringe. I think that that's part of our evolving culture. So it's also very commendable that people, like, I'm going to bring up Jane Remover again because they're a great example. They're using their identity as like an integral part of their art. You can see how that evolves with each of their contrasting projects, because a lot of times they'll have different projects that one album will sound nothing like the next. And I think that that's awesome. So critics are just not getting it in the same way that back in the day, like history is repeating itself. Like when jazz, punk, early hip hop, those were all initially dismissed, and then critics had to catch up with the culture. And I think that that's just what's happening again. And it's so silly to me. So what have music critics even looked for historically? What has been required to appease these talking heads? So critics used to be way more harsh, actually. And in the style of Fantano, it used to be very unusual to give out a good score. So sort of like old head professors that think giving out a C is acceptable for most people. And it's just so exceptional to get an A or a B, and they hardly ever give out A's or B's because I think that it's just like a pretentious thing, in my opinion. I would like to know what you think, but that's my opinion. So critics through publications also used to enjoy like sparking conversation and controversy through their harsh ratings. And this would sway some people's opinions, and it would make other people double down on theirs. So it was like, it got them the attention that they needed to publish their publications. Music journalists, they used to view themselves as cultural philosophers, not reviewers. So I guess that I just view myself as a fellow musician that wants to have a conversation instead of like a cultural philosopher. Like, aren't we all cultural philosophers? We're all participating in the culture, are we not? So these critics, they seem to equate polish and loudness with professionalism, and that's kind of part of like the loudness wars in the producer world. So these raw and distorted music productions, they kind of get side-eyed by the critics just automatically because it doesn't sound so clean and so perfect. And I think that there should be a shift away from that, because AI music is just going to make the perfect sounds, and I want a real human sound. Music critic culture used to have the goal of separating the serious music from the merely commercial music also. So I think that that's arguably still the case, because people want to have their gatekeeping, they want to have their taste, and that's just kind of part of like the underground scene and being a gatekeeper and stuff. So I think that there's some merit to that, but also we should just talk about like what's making you feel something, what's making people have a conversation, what's bringing people together, and less about, oh, I'm so pretentious. So most music reviews now also are positive. This didn't always used to be the case. And I think that here's an article quote from an article from the New Yorker that I want to read to you. So in 2018, the social science blog Data Colada looked at Metacritic, a review aggregator, and found that more than 4 out of 5 albums released that year had received an average rating of at least 70 points out of 100. On the site, albums that score 61 or above are colored green for good. Even today, music reviews on Metacritic are almost always green, unlike reviews of films, which are more likely to be yellow for mixed or average, or red for bad. The music site Pitchfork, which was once known for its scabrous reviews, hasn't handed down a perfectly contemptuous score 0.0 out of 10 since 2007, which was for This Is Next, an inoffensive indie rock compilation. And in 2022, decades too late for poor Andrew Ridgeley, Rolling Stone abolished its famous 5-star system and installed a milder replacement, a pair of merit badges, instant classic, and hear this. That's interesting. Some negative reviewers of Taylor Swift also, by the way, got death threats and they got doxxed. And similarly with Nicki Minaj, because Nicki Minaj fans will come and eat you alive, apparently. Music criticism also started off mostly just for rock, and it branched into pop and hip-hop not until the 2010s. So that, to me, also kind of exposes the racism in the music critic world and goes all the way up to the Grammys, which I think is another topic for another day. And music criticism has also evolved because of social media. These critics can no longer hide behind a publication, and the public can interact with the critics through comments and TikTok stitches, etc. And it's also more likely that these critics know that the artist can be watching them. So it's almost like they're talking more directly to the artist rather than they're putting their opinion on writing, and then they know that the fans are going to be reading it. So that brings me back to Mr. Fantano. He didn't evolve past the article era of music reviewing. He's still posting these YouTube videos as if he's reading a blog article that he wrote. So it's just not helpful, right? To be on a high horse about your musical taste anymore. It's not helpful to critique production because the gold standard of production has long been dismantled, in my opinion. It only makes sense to use music to connect with people, to challenge your ideas, to build your communities, right? So if we're going to move on from this old way of talking about music or critiquing music, how should we move forward from that? I think it's like a paradigm shift, right? So if everyone is amazing, then no one is. You can't just be like, oh, you made music, so you're amazing. I don't think that that's necessarily the case. But in my opinion, everyone is in a race against themselves. So the ultimate goal is being as authentic as possible through your art and having that ability through your art to connect with your intended audience, to be a part of the cultural conversation that you want to have. I know that that's not probably the answer that people want, but it's kumbaya a little bit. I'm a little kumbaya. So the point of a music critic is also different than other critics, right? There's nothing really to critique, with food, for example. You can save someone time and money with movies also, because movies are so long. With a music critic, it takes you longer to watch this YouTube video than it does for you to go listen to a song that people are saying is good or is bad, etc. So music critics you're either going to be a productive part of the conversation or you're going to be like a culture vulture. It makes no sense anymore for someone to position themselves as an authority on music. And I also come from the classical world, right? Where everyone's like, oh, the pinnacle of music is all these old dead white guys, and maybe probably not, right? So there's no gold standard for music. It's all about, like I said, connecting with each other and having a cultural conversation. I don't understand why more music commentators or critics or whatever, they don't talk about the impact of the music that it's had on the people or the intent of the music. They focus only on the dry execution of the literal sound. And so why don't we ask the question when we're looking at a piece of music or an album or something? We should ask, what's the intended audience? Did it reach the intended audience? What was the cultural impact of this music? And how has it traveled socially? And so what actually makes music bad? I would argue that the only bad music is grifter music. I do think that there is definitely bad music out there. Like, if you ask me, Taylor Swift, Drake, like all of this mass profit machine music is slop. It's all the closest thing to being your AI slop. And it's clearly lacking originality. It's clearly produced for mass consumption. And it's clearly produced to appeal to the widest possible audience because they're thinking of it as a cash cow. They're not thinking of it as a passion project. Some will argue that they are thinking of it as a passion project, but in my opinion, those very big scale artists, especially like Taylor Swift, who I will make a whole video on another day. And if you're a Taylor Swift fan, I'm definitely not. You're definitely not my audience. So, okay, thanks, bye. We want music to be authentic in order to connect with it and respect our personal experiences and cultures. We want to reject the big labels, the big machines that are just spoon feeding us, just force feeding us, basically the same old thing over and over and over again, and packaging it in different packages of the same thing. Yeah, that too. So I'm a fan of like anything experimental right now, anything that's pushing the boundaries, anyone who's clearly passionate about their craft, even if they're not a super established artist yet. I enjoy watching these new artists explore their identity through their music and pushing boundaries, especially with the genre mixing, because I also think that this will be another topic, like what is a genre anymore? I don't think that it's like necessarily like these boxes that used to be put in. And I think we need to throw out everything that has been considered standard. So these new generations of artists, they're redefining sound. They're making us listen more thoughtfully, which I think is so fresh and exciting. So ultimately, music is a part of our identity and our cultural commentary, right? I don't aim to be a music critic myself, but I do aim to be a commentator, helping you break down what we are hearing and helping you develop your individual taste. So if you made it all the way to the end, thanks so much for watching my first ever YouTube video. Please subscribe for more. We're going to have at least one of these a week. And I do like a daily review over on the TikTok of some of these albums and things that people are suggesting to me. So thanks, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!